crust is a pretty simple recipe, unless you're doing it gluten-free, and then it gets more difficult and challenging. I posted this recipe about 2 weeks ago to evolutionaryeats.com and decided that I really needed to make a video to show you how strange this one is. Pizza crust is essentially a cracker. Sometimes you want a softer one, sometimes you want a little crispy. But what you're going to get out of this is somewhere in between. It's going to have some nice crispiness on the base, and it's going to have a nice chewy texture, and it's delicious. So I'm going to get started here. I'm using a commercially available gluten-free flour blend, and if you go to evolutionaryeats.com, you will find out what this is. One thing I will tell you is that, especially with gluten-free baking, I have discovered that weighing every ingredient is essential. You will not get good results unless you weigh. If you're trying to do volumetric, it just doesn't work as well. And this is mostly because gluten-free flour blends tend to have some variations. So I am doing it this way. So I got 10 ounces exactly of that flour blend. And then I'm just going to dump it into that bowl. 2 ounces of white rice flour, also gluten-free. So 2 teaspoons of psyllium husk powder. 2 teaspoons. Now what the psyllium husk does is it gives it some texture, more like gluten. So then I have 2 ounces of oat flour. Okay, and then we're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. Notice I'm measuring over this handy-dandy bowl. We have 2 teaspoons of baking powder. I'm just going to take the whisk and blend all this together. You want the whisk as well blended as humanly possible. All right, so we're ready to get the yeast going. I had to wait a little bit because the water was too hot. 2 minutes in my microwave apparently is too much. So all I'm going to do is bloom the yeast. I have just regular old active dry yeast here. You can use instant if you would like. It's just because I bake a lot, this is what I have in the house. So we're going to do 2 teaspoons of active dry yeast. Oops. Now the water already had some sugar in it, 2 teaspoons of sugar. Once that blooms, which is going to be a couple of minutes, then we'll come back and finish this up. The yeast is really starting to look good, so I think I'm just going to give it a real quick, tiny little whisk, just to make sure I have all the clumps loosened up. You don't want to agitate it too much right now. And then I'm just going to pour it in here, a little bit at a time. I'm kind of treating this almost like a biscuit dough. So I've made the well in the middle and just kind of folding it in. I don't really want to agitate this a lot. That's starting to look really good. Pour the rest of that in. Get all that yeast in there, perfect. We still need this cup, so don't get rid of it. All right, then we have an egg. 1 whole large chicken egg, if I can get it opened. Whisk, give that a good whisk. This is just plain old apple cider vinegar, and we are going to add 1/2 teaspoon and no more to that egg. You don't want a huge vinegary taste, but what I'm trying to do is activate the baking powder. And it actually works perfectly, just that tiny little bit. So now we're going to get our hands in here. I'm going to use gloves, you don't have to. I've just found that this dough is so sticky, and it's not like a regular yeast dough where it kind of creates a skin and it gets all gluten-y and you've got this nice protein. It doesn't do it this way. All right, so just pour that egg in there, and then we're done with that cup. And you can try to stir this in as much as possible with your spoon. This is where gluten-free baking gets interesting. Now, I could have used my stand mixer, but when I've tried these recipes, it really didn't work on this one very well. Okay, so you've basically got what looks like a cookie dough. It's kind of sticky, it's kind of messy, and I'm just going to get in here. Believe it or not, kneading a little bit on this one is important to get that egg and vinegar and the yeast and everybody happy in the bowl. You can flip it if you want. You can see if you can see this. So you can see there's actually some strands that look like protein that are starting to form, and that's the combination of the xanthan gum and the egg and the psyllium husk, I guess. That's all you need to do. Now, the dough is a little bit warm, and we want to keep it that way. And I'm just taking classic, ordinary plastic wrap. You don't have to put it on the skin. And then you're just going to cover it and get it airtight. And then put it in a warm place. Now, this has to rise. Rise is a relative term in this. It's not going to get very big. So this has to sit for about 2 hours, hour and a half to 2 hours. You'll kind of know, you'll start to see some bubbles, it'll soften, it'll hydrate more. Really what you're trying to do is get all of these granules hydrated so you get a better dough. And also to activate the yeast, because this rise does one thing, but the next step after that does something completely different, and it'll be really cool. I'm already starting to see some condensation on the top, which is awesome. So I'm going to set this aside, and then I'll be back and going to make some pizza sauce. It's delicious. Okay, so this is the pizza sauce, and it's very, very simple. Also on the website, evolutionaryeats.com, you know, you can't have pizza without sauce. So if I'm going to show you the crust, I'm going to show you the sauce, and then everything else is up to you. Okay, so what I have in here is a 15-ounce can of tomato puree. I like to use puree. Sauce is a little too runny and thin, and I've just found over the years if you buy the puree, that works better. And then we're going to put in 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, and I'm just eyeballing it here. 1 whole tablespoon of Greek oregano. 1 whole tablespoon of dried basil. I like 1 whole tablespoon of Italian seasoning. Then we've got, ooh, that smells good. 1 teaspoon of onion powder or granulated onion. Also 1 teaspoon of granulated garlic. And then I'm just going to eyeball this. This is cayenne. But then we put in a clove of grated garlic. We have a little bit more to add. We're going to add a teaspoon of kosher salt, and then some freshly ground black pepper. And then again, smoked paprika, just maybe 1/4 teaspoon. And 2 tablespoons, and I can measure it, I guess, just to make you happy. 2 tablespoons of dry red wine. I am using a merlot, which is what I'm drinking tonight with my pizza. And that's the whole recipe right there. That's it. Now I'm going to cover this and let this sit in the refrigerator while my pizza crust rises. I like to make this way ahead. You can make it a day ahead. You can make it a couple of hours ahead, but just make it ahead. You don't want to do it right before you put on the pizza. See? So the dough has risen for 90 minutes, 1.5 hours, and it's risen, not a lot, but if you touch it, you can actually feel that there's more hydration. It's a little smoother than it was before. And now we're going to go to step 2. Now all of this is a little complicated, but it's all worth it. Trust me. Okay, so I'm just spraying down the top with some cooking spray so it doesn't stick too bad to my little hands. And we're just going to press this out to about between 12 and 14 inches. Now this doesn't have to be beautiful. You're going to get some rustic edges. Okay, this is looking pretty good. I'm going to go just a little bit bigger. Just make sure you don't have any big gaping holes in it. Fine. Now I'm going to cover this up with plastic wrap and set it aside for about 30 minutes. And meanwhile, I'm preheating my oven to 400 degrees because we have to par bake this or partially bake it before we put anything on it. I'll be back. So the dough has risen for a second time for about 30 minutes. And now I'm going to stick them into a 400 degree oven for about 10 minutes. Okay, so here is our par baked crust. It has a little teeny weeny bit of golden brown on the edges, but you can absolutely tell that there is a baked surface on this. I'm going to start topping this, and you can listen to this awesome music, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so you have about 30 minutes more to go. This pizza is ready to go. The oven is screaming hot at 450 degrees. You are going to bake this for 10 minutes. You're going to turn it and then cook it for another 10 minutes, pull it out, put it onto a cooling space, and then let it rest for 10 minutes before you dare cut into it. The pizza is ready. It is beautiful. It cooked for about 20 minutes in the oven, and now I'm about to cut into it. I let it rest for 10 minutes before I did that, and you just heard that crunch on the crust. Oh, that looks really, really good. So I used some bell pepper, onion, black olives, and pepperoni. And here we go. Let's see what this does. This one looks good. Oh yeah, it's a little floppy. Could have been baked a little bit longer, but it looks really, really good. So here we go. Give it a taste. This is an easy recipe. It takes a little time, but it's totally worth it. You can par bake that crust, stick it in the refrigerator, make that sauce, stick it in the refrigerator, and when your guests and family and friends show up, just let them assemble their own pizza. Throw it in the oven, everybody's happy. My wine pairing for tonight is a lovely 2014 California Merlot. I also highly recommend doing an Italian Pinot Grigio with pizza. You will be amazed at that pairing. It's absolutely delicious. I'm Lou. This is Evolutionary Eats. Go to evolutionaryeats.com/recipes for this one and many more. You can find me on Instagram at Evolutionary Eats, and you can find me on Facebook at Evolutionary Eats. I'm Lou.